Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stephanie Michelle, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Hi, Sarah. This episode was your idea, and we didn't even discuss it. So what do you have? What are we talking about?
You're really going to let everyone peek behind the curtains like that? This is a well-oiled machine. We have a whole team.
I know we're talking about the new year. Happy New Year, everybody. Almost. What about the new year?
I think New Year can be really hard for people when they are giving up diet culture, when you're struggling with body image and disordered eating. Diet talk is at its loudest at New Year. But even beyond that, even if you are in recovery from disordered eating, New Year's can be such a tempting time to have that whole clean slate.
Yes.
And even if you're not setting yourself formal resolutions, I've done it so many years. I'll be like, right, next year, this is what next year's going to be like. This is who I'm going to be next year. Come January 1st, fresh start and all of that. And it's tempting to do that, but ultimately, I don't think it's helpful. That's my conclusion.
That was a good episode.
It was a good episode.
No, I fully agree. And I think knowing that is kind of most of it, because as you were talking, I was thinking about all the times that I was like, okay, because by the end of December, I was usually in the thick of it, like it was such a time of food disorder that would have come up so much. And by the time that New Year ball dropped, I was like, well, this clean slate is exactly what I needed. It was this promise. It was a Band-Aid for the moment. It's okay that it's this bad right now because it's about to become really good. But I really believed that. I think that I really had this idea that, number one, you could control things that way. And that the momentum of that moment, of how bad that felt and how that will, that does create some kind of adrenaline to fix, that would persist. When I'm thinking about it now, I don't feel at all. I don't even think about it anymore. And I think that it's because I recognize that the instinct to do that, it's kind of like the diet starts Monday. It's the same idea, just for, in a bigger way. The very thought of it to me feels like, oh, I know what that is. That's my need to fix this moment right now. This really actually doesn't have much to do with the sustainability of that goal. It's to do with me just needing to feel better right now. And that I can deal with. That's kind of like, okay, I just need to feel better right now. I just need something to help me feel like this moment won't last forever. So to know that is, again, to see that man behind the curtain and or woman or whomever, and see how things are operating and being able to sort of have access into your own psychology a little bit and to say like, okay, like that makes sense to me. I don't need to follow that thread, from a sort of inaccurate place almost.
I remember the end of 2010 where New Year's came and I was so happy to say goodbye to 2010 because that was a really difficult year for me. I had brain surgery. That was the year my mum died as well. And there was this real sense of New Year that I was putting something behind me. And I remember it was much more about, as opposed to thinking I was going to create something new, that somehow I was shedding something old. And I didn't. Just FYI, that didn't work either. I don't know what I was expecting. I think the clean slate is so appealing to the perfectionistic mindset.
Yes, black and white.
Yeah, like a new exercise book when you would write on that first page and you've never made a mistake yet. This idea, you do it from scratch and that's it. Now you're going to get it right on this occasion. I can also remember the disappointment at the end of each year and think, oh, this wasn't the year I stopped binging, which was ultimately what I wanted more than anything else for many years. But I wouldn't think, is this going to be another year of binging? Because I don't think I would have allowed myself at any moment to think, fast forward a year and I could be in the same place.
Yeah.
That was unacceptable. So that was another thing that was appealing. Did you ever do the full-blown New Year's resolutions, writing things down? This is what you're going to do in the new year?
Probably. Yeah, I'm sure I have journals full of that. To be honest, I can more so remember that by January 2nd, I was already binging and was like, "I messed it up." Like, already I messed it up, it was so disheartening and so but I think that's also kind of why I was like, I can't do like, this whole setup, I knew that I had that rebel spirit, and I was like, "Am I purposefully messing it up just so that I don't have the pressure of this clean slate?"
I had a family member that in the build up to one New Year was announcing how she was gonna go on a diet with one of the well-known slimming clubs, and she talked about it for about 2 months beforehand, and I remember thinking, "She keeps talking about it. If she was gonna do it, she'd have done it by now." And then January came, and she did it for, like, 6 to 8 months and lost a lot of weight and all of that, and I remember thinking, "Wow, there's really something in this New Year thing, and
Hmm.
maybe that's what I need to do next year." I really remember thinking that, and of course, I think most people know how this story is gonna end. The tables turned, and she's, really struggled with her relationship with food and gained the weight back from the diet. But it was really interesting watching somebody else seeming to be successful at their New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
That brought up quite a bit of stuff for me because I was struggling at that time, and I was watching her apparently be so successful. And I thought maybe that's what I need to do. I need to really talk about it and have a really long build up to doing something.
I think that it's not entirely true that nobody can use the momentum of this time of year to do something. And I'm not necessarily talking about weight stuff. I'm talking about whatever it might be, this idea. I think sometimes for black and white thinkers, it can be a way of reorganizing, which isn't inherently bad. I think that I do that sometimes where I'm like, okay, I just kind of need to reorganize. I need to recenter myself. But I think the difference is this idea that reorganization and recentering will last forever, or that it will or that you need it to look like that forever. I think if that sort of thing speaks to you around the new year, it might feel better to make this a shorter term thing. For me, it's kind of like that resetting and reorganization I only need for a couple of weeks. And then I feel like, okay, I've kind of like gotten back to my middle of whatever, of workflow, of whatever it is. And then, okay, here I am. I don't need to continue because that's where I think it becomes a slippery slope of this perfectionism, where it's like, I must continue, I must do it this way when your body doesn't need that anymore. It just sort of needed a little bit of, especially if you're around family a lot in December and all the parties and all the socializing, as we talked about in a previous episode, it can be a bit disorienting. And there can be a bit of like, oh, I feel left in the middle here. And I want to kind of get back into a routine. I think that's very compelling after the season we have, but it's not necessarily something you're going to keep on feeling like you need. And that is going to keep driving. It's not going to keep driving you all year because you're going to resettle. Um, so I think to reframe also, what are you really looking for at that time of year? If you do truly have a craving to sort of recenter yourself, might it just be coming off the heels of December and you just need a little bit of that? It's not necessarily needing to become this whole big year-long process where you have to set all these goals because you feel like you should, which is also part of this. I think that there's a lot of pressure to set intentions and set this and set that, which again can be great and helpful if it's coming from a place where you really mean it. You know what I mean? Or where it feels organic to do so, not because you feel like you should and everybody else is.
Have I ever told you how I mark the end of my years?
Mm-mm.
So on New Year's Day, I record a video to my I love to do a video to myself. I record a video to myself where I reflect on the year and just talk a bit about what's happened that year and my feelings and thoughts about it. And then I talk about the next year and I just talk about sort of my hopes for the next year, but in a very gentle process oriented way as opposed to outcome oriented. So this year, for example, so New Year's Day, I get to watch last year's video, which is always really interesting. And there was one year, the first year I did it, I've probably been doing it for about 5 years now. Although the beginning of this year, I was really upset because I couldn't find the video I did the
Oh.
year before. So I still have never found that video to this day.
Oh,
No, I don't know. The one I recorded at the end of last year,
you'll find it when you need it.
hopefully. That's what I'm hoping. But I really have looked everywhere. Um, but you know what they say? It's been the
You
last
posted
20
it on YouTube somewhere. It's like
Probably, yeah.
it's getting comments galore somewhere.
Yeah. But there was the first year that I did it, when I watched it back the next year, I couldn't remember anything I said.
Mm.
And one of the things that I had said was that year I really wanted to try to enjoy writing more
Mm.
because it wasn't something that I really had a rhythm with. And that was the year that I wrote my book. But going into
Ah,
that year, I never planned
ah,
to write a
yeah.
book in that January. I thought a book was like a couple of years down the line or something. And then it so happened that I ended up signing up to something and did the book that
Yeah.
year. So I could not believe it. I genuinely couldn't believe it when I watched this video back and it's talking about enjoying writing. And I was like, what? This stuff's magical.
Well, because there's not so much expectation. If you'd said, "I'm gonna write a book," you
Mm,
gotta wonder if you would have written a book.
yes.
Um,
And that's what I mean about the difference between a process oriented
yeah.
intention and an outcome one. An outcome
Yes.
one would be like, oh, I want to have X number of YouTube subscribers by the end of the year. That's not going to be a helpful goal
Yes.
for
I
me.
love this. It so I don't remember the year it was. Maybe it was must have been 2021. Um, I remember, Intuitive Eating Ireland, Sinead.
Hmm.
I'm sure that many of our listeners know who they are if you're on Instagram. Sinead had talked about a New Year intention on New Year's Eve, and I remember thinking to myself, "I don't like that," but I like Sinead so much that I was like, "Okay, Sinead, I'll set myself an intention," and I remember just thinking, "I'll think of a word," and I also wasn't attached to it. It was like, "I'll think of a word, and if I forget this word in 3 days and never think of it again, so be it." You know what I mean? But I'll put one out there for right now. So the word was connection. And at this time I was sort of new on Instagram and I was working very independently. This was the year you reached out to me and we created this podcast. It was the year that I started traveling to see old friends that I hadn't, like, these things started to happen again, not because of this intention I'm going to do this, but I noticed I didn't ever make myself a video, but I realized as I was moving through the year, I am connecting more and more, and that intention sort of just planted a seed a little bit, but without the expectation. Um, so thanks, Sinead. But I think it was something that was probably leaning towards anyway. You know what I mean? It's like when your life is headed in some kind of direction, it's like you know what your intention is because it's ready to rise to the surface at that point. You know what I mean? Versus times when I'd said, I'm gonna stop binging this year. And I was so far away from that ever being able to happen that first of all, it was an outcome, but it was also just not, I wasn't ready for that one. So I think that having an idea of like, what are we ready for this year really is maybe a more apropos way of thinking about it.
Mm. Do you have a word in mind for next year yet?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Um,
What was the word for this year? Because I
I
think
had one.
you
I
did.
had one.
You told me once. You might have even mentioned it on the podcast,
I think I did. Do you know I've forgotten it?
but that's okay. It's not a black and white thing.
Yeah. This year, it's good we can edit out pauses.
Or if we need to kill some time, we'll just leave them in. If the episode runs short, you don't have to decide it right
No,
now.
I didn't want to.
Oh, okay. Well, great.
What am I ready for, Sarah?
What about if your word was London?
Well, that's done.
Yeah. Or retreat in
Retreat,
Tuscany.
retreat, and I'm gonna be traveling a lot this year, actually, but just bear with me a second.
That's all right. No.
Just, I'm rushing it because I feel that there is something bubbling up, and I can't name it yet, but I know that it's there. I know I can see it almost, like I know what it looks like, but I don't know what the word is. What's yours?
I've never had a word. Am I supposed to
Well,
pick one? I mean, I like the
yeah,
idea of
just
it.
just for fun.
Yeah, I like the
What are
idea
you
of it.
ready for?
Maybe my word could be homeowner. That would be nice. Millionaire.
Millionaire.
Yes.
Slumdog.
Who are you calling a dog? Um, I'll have to give it some thought because I take this request quite seriously.
You know what mine is?
Go
I
on.
have one. I mean, like, who knows? I might change mine tomorrow, but like, this idea of flexibility, but not in the way. For example, I have really been noticing the way in which my life changes when I'm paying attention to the nudges, right? Or like where I'm not necessarily planning something, but something comes along and I'm like, hey, all right, I'm kind of open to that. Let me go that way. And then I go that way and I'm like, oh, this is good. Like the podcast, it's just, I never would have thought we would do a podcast, and the training that I'm in, that was, um, following these leads, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I want this year to be, I want to do this in my work. I want this to be how my home life of, it's kind of like this openness to evolution in its own as it presents. So it's this flexibility of not knowing in advance what that needs to look like. Cause in my head, I'm kind of like, I want to write a book this year. But who knows, maybe something else will come across, and I'm staying open to that. Maybe it's openness is a better word. Openness, flexibility to watching for these windows to open. Maybe I'll call it windows. Yeah, I'm ready for some windows. And I that's mine for now.
Mm. Well, it's windows of opportunity. So opportunity.
Yes. No, windows of I like, yeah,
Okay.
opportunity, fine.
No, don't change it from my account. It's only if it resonates more.
No, I do like the windows thing. I really like the visual of it. I've got a window in my mind. It's
So
really
there was a word that bubbled up for me just before you started talking about that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And my mind wanted to push it away. And then I was like, did it come up for a reason? And then that was a whole thing going on. The word that came up was risk. I want
Ooh,
to take some risks.
yeah, I like that.
And
Ooh, I like that.
it's a bit of a scary word for me because
Mm,
I don't take risks at all, but I take very calculated risks.
I like it. I really, when you said it, I was like, ooh, I'm like leaning into that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll go skydiving in London.
Let's do it. But with like a company with a really poor health and safety record. Just got to make it riskier. Skydiving's not that risky.
It is to me. I can't understand. Every time I take off in an airplane, I'm like, this is a bad idea. How does this work?
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
I guess we could possibly touch on diet talk in January because that's going to be what a lot of people are having to navigate and be exposed to, and what that's like when you are trying to enter January and not engage in the whole diet talk. I have to share with you this. So my dad says to me the other day, I've come up with a new idea for a diet. I said, oh, okay. And he said, yeah, I guess I'm going to call it the body diet. And it's basically where you listen to your body and then in response to that. So it sounds great, Dad. I didn't even tell him. He said, I'm going to write a book, call it the body diet. You listen to your body and you eat in response to that. Right. Okay, Dad.
It's got 10 principles. That's
Yeah.
really great. So here's a question. When that, now, just the way you told the story, it's very interesting. So if someone's talking about dieting in general, are you of the mind, I'm just going to be quiet and allow that person to do what they need to do? Or are you an interjector? Are you someone who's like, well, let me tell you?
No, I allow it.
Yeah.
Because that's where they're at. They're not looking to be converted. I'm not going to join in. If they ask my opinion, I'll give it. And I don't think that there's necessarily a right or wrong way to do that. When I sometimes hear people interjecting and saying something, I think it's terrific. I think it's really checking in with ourselves on that too. I just feel like that's not how you reach people.
Yeah.
And do you know what it comes back to? I'll tell you what just popped into my head then, because I grew up in a Christian household and I grew up with Christian beliefs. Some branches of the Christian faith, you're supposed to be evangelizing and spreading the gospel. And there was something in that and my experiences around that and having seen that and been a part of that about pushing my opinion and my belief system on other people that makes me just not want to do that now.
Oh, I just had things click about understanding you better because you talk about that. That's something you're very careful not to do. Or you watch you're pushing your own beliefs or assuming that they're correct. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense now to me.
Yeah. So again, it might have even been in the same conversation. My dad announces to me that he's lost some weight. He thinks he's lost this amount of weight, and he's saying it in a very happy tone. fair enough. And I went, oh, well, how are you feeling? Are you feeling good? And he's like, yeah, I feel great. And then we moved down that road
Yeah.
because that's what I care about at the moment is how's he feeling? It used to really affect me when I would hear him talking about his weight, like all of my body would tense up and I would feel angry and I would feel annoyed and I would feel frustrated. And I, because it was hard to hear and hard to hear the same things being repeated. But now I think I've just become such an evolved person, Steph,
Well,
that I just let him do him and I'll do
um,
me.
you say that in jest, but I was just about to say that I think sometimes it can almost feel near impossible to do that because of what you just described of that visceral reaction, right? So there is sometimes of that like the whole body cleanse, and the adrenaline rises and the like, oh, like the anger, at least for me, it's anger of like, no, I don't want to hear that. That's interrupting. Like, or you've been pushing that kind of thing on me and I resent it. Like, whatever it is. And I think that sometimes that interjecting is that reaction. It's like, I can't even contain this energy in my body. I need to spit something out. I cannot just sit here and nod. It almost feels like uh, there's a conflict of self there. And I think that's a part of the process because I certainly, obviously, relate to that. And there was a long time where I couldn't shut up. I couldn't just nod. Or if I was in a situation with like friends versus family. With my family, I would speak, but with my friends or in friend groups or acquaintance groups, I wouldn't. And then that would become angst on my end. It would become anxiety. It would turn into myself. But it was this energy that would rise. And I think it's like paying attention to when you are in conversations around New Year diets, New Year this, New Year that, New Year bodies, um, how that actually feels viscerally for you to know where you are in this process. Because if you've been working on this a while, that energy may be getting smaller and you may notice that you do have more access into being able to let them move through their process that doesn't feel threatening to you. But you may be in a place of, oh, I just feel so enraged. And the other day, we went to see the Christmas Spectacular at Radio City. And I went out with my mother and my mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law we were in the vestibule waiting to be seated at the restaurant prior. And she turned to me and my 8-year-old was next to me. And she said, I'm going to be cutting back on snacks because I've gained 4 pounds. And people always feel the need to tell me this. It's like, I think people are like 5 years behind as far as where I'm at. Like they think they're connected. Like people are like, this, that was me. That was something you would have said to me 5 years ago. But people tell me about their weight and health isms all the time. But because my 8-year-old was there, I got angry and I felt that. And so I couldn't just bypass it, even though I knew I could probably just steer the conversation differently. My 8-year-old would not have known and been the wiser, but there was an energy in me about it. And I was like, I need to. So I shook my head and I said no. Um, and it was awkward, but I needed to do it. I needed to say no. Like, just it was a way of standing up for my daughter, and being like, this is not allowed here, was a boundary for her. And I did. And I feel a little weird about it now because I feel like I'm glad I did it. I needed to do it. But I also was like, oh, that's such a, and sometimes it's awkward to be in these positions where you feel like what I need to do for myself is not necessarily socially, like people don't know what I'm doing, or it's like going to create a rift or something, creates a little conflict. And that's true this time of year. I think it's like, where are we in this decision around, do I say something and make it weird? Or do I stuff it and make it weird for me, or make it uncomfortable for me? And I think making room for that, there isn't, again, one right answer around how to respond in the perfect way. It might, what works on one hand might cause something else on the other hand. And that's part of it.
I think you highlight really quite nicely, for me anyway, the idea of authenticity in our communication and our responses, which is not to say that we don't adjust our responses to social situations. But if something is setting your insides on fire and you have to hold that, you believe you can't expel any of that energy at all or speak what's true for you in that moment, I think there's a real cost to you for holding that inside.
Mm.
And I wonder if you hadn't done anything, you'd have gone away later and probably I mean, I'm just guessing, or some people in similar situations, like, ruminate on that a little bit. "Oh, how could I have handled that? And maybe I should have said something and done something. What does it mean that I didn't do something?" Yeah, it's so important to reiterate, it's not a you have to say something, and it's definitely not a you shouldn't say something either. And it's not somehow, "Oh, you're better if you don't have a reaction," or, like, there's something
Yeah.
the problem for you if you do have a reaction. When we keep squashing down what we are feeling and what we're thinking, and we're pretending, that I think it leaches out in other ways in our behavior. Yeah.
Yes. And I think this comes off the heels for me of having done that so much that I can't do it anymore. So it's an informed choice around I know what I'll feel like when I don't say so, when I'm not authentic. That has been a life story. And that's, talking about intentions or like for me that's been a larger, not a New Year's one, but something larger of this authenticity and of speaking. And I make that decision from a place of I know that that cost is mine in the end. And maybe for someone else it wouldn't be, right? Like I think that I'm particularly vulnerable to that. I don't make peace well with having not said something. And perhaps a more evolved version of myself would say, "No, I can make peace with that." I don't know, but not now. And so or not in that moment. And so it's sort of like, yeah, that I think that comes from a level of attunement to you and to knowing like what you need in that. But what if you're in a situation where you can't, or it is gonna compromise. I'm thinking of maybe in like at a party or in the workplace. Maybe that's a really good example of the coworkers talking about their diets and things. And it's not necessarily appropriate, not that it's appropriate to your mother-in-law, but to me it is. And I'm much more likely to say no to a family member than I would be in a professional situation, in a corporate culture or something like that where that might be a little riskier, even from a social point of view. Like if I say it, I'm going to be the odd man out and then I'm not going to feel like I belong. And that's also compromising something for myself. What do we do in the workplace around this?
My stance is to come at it from a place of compassion, actually. That's what came to mind. That was the word that came to mind when you were talking, that we have such a sense when we're on the other side of it or going through it. We were there once. You were there, I was there. Like you said, 5 years ago, that comment from your mother-in-law, you'd have engaged with that and been like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." Whatever it is, your conversation even would have been at the time. So, I think that's where I go to. Like, "Oh, well, that was me." And I can take a moment to have some gratitude that I'm not there anymore. I think the challenge is when you're still doing the undoing. When people talk about it, what I think it does is it activates something that's still live.
Yeah.
So you hear people talking about their diets, and actually that trigger is usually thinking, "Oh my goodness, what are they thinking of me that I'm not dieting?" Or, "Maybe I should be dieting. Is this non-diet thing really right for me? Is it just that I'm just rubbish at dieting and everybody else can do it? What does it mean if everybody else manages to diet? Everything I thought was wrong. Am I making excuses for myself when I say that this no dieting thing is the way to go?"
Yes, I think that's exactly it. And I think it's also among a cohort of people. Let's say that you're not in the middle of it and you really have sort of made it to the other side, but you're really unhappy in your body. I think this is another cohort of people where it's like I've made peace with food, but I don't know that it's worth it because I'm so upset about the way that I feel in my body that these like I left diet culture to do this thing and now I'm feeling this way. And so when I'm hearing this, I'm sort of like, well, maybe I do want to go back to that. Maybe that is the right thing for me. And it taps into that band-aid of like, that would make me feel better right now. And now I feel like I don't even have access to that. So I think it taps into those live wires.
Mm.
And I think that's what, whenever we're in this sort of situation of feeling triggered, um, that there's something there to look at to like, what is there that is not feeling resolved? They're windows.
They are. And if you take a risk by thinking and asking yourself, well, I think it's easy to fall into an element of self-righteousness about it. We're right, we know the way out. And if we're feeling triggered by other people's responses, whenever I've been triggered in those kinds of moments, I know from how it feels to me that there was an element of self-righteousness in it. I'm right and you're wrong. And I think it's an opportunity to check in with where you're at and what it is that's being activated for you.
But also not just self-righteousness, but if you have doubt. I think it's both sets of people, like the ones who are like, I am staunchly anti-diet and feeling that sense of self-righteousness, but also I was, but now I don't know if I should be. And I have doubt about it. They're both two sides of the same coin almost there. I think unless we feel truly at peace with our decisions and where we are and potentially our bodies and our food, it's really hard to stay not untriggered in that kind of a situation.
Mhm.
It just maybe points to where there's more work to do or where there's more questions to be asked.
Yeah. If you can look at that trigger as a window of opportunity and risk asking the hard questions,
You can really
maybe-
connect with yourself.
yeah, you can almost welcome the triggers. I wonder if there's a reframe here about welcoming that triggered response, because it's bringing something up that's still got energy in it, that's still activated. And we can panic at the triggered response about what does it mean, or recognize it's a trigger, recognize the discomfort, recognize that doubt is here. And then when we feel grounded again, like coming back to, okay, where am I at? What is
Yeah.
it I actually believe? What feels like the best
Yeah.
course of action, decisions for me to make?
And I like that you added when I come back to being grounded.
Yes.
Because I think inside of that moment, it's
It's got you.
it's too
got
much.
you.
It's too overwhelming.
So Steph and I have a couple of offers that might satisfy different needs going forward into 2023. So I'm launching my first digital product, which is called the Binge Eating Toolbox. And it's going to be short videos of me and tools and techniques. It's going to be some worksheets as well that you can dip into depending on where you're at with binge eating. So there are tools for after a binge, before a binge, and of the food planning and creating structure, as well as freedom around some of your food choices. And instead of signing up to a diet, why don't you get my toolbox?
Oh, yeah, keep going.
I was done.
Oh.
Steph, don't you have something starting in January?
As a matter of fact, I do. I actually created this. It's a gentle nutrition course. So this is not for everybody. This is for people who have been through the recovery process and are looking to reintegrate nutrition in a way that is not going to compromise recovery. So I remember feeling like I was at a point where I wanted to say, okay, I've really truly made peace with cupcakes and ice cream and cereal and peanut butter. I want to start looking at nutrition again, but the only way that there are offers to do that is through a diet culture lens. So I created and it's an 8-week workshop, and it is heavily centered around mindset, around maintaining the integrity of everything that we learn in recovery and our commitment to ourselves, our self-compassion, our not becoming obsessed, our not becoming attached, our not becoming moral around these types of foods, but being able to reintegrate them safely. Because I think that food freedom is about freedom with all types of foods. And sometimes we get stuck in just the permission to eat the sweets and the previously forbidden foods. And this is bringing back everything. So that begins on January 17th.
That sounds amazing, Steph. How does someone sign up?
Well, as a matter of fact, there's a link in the show notes, or you can visit my website.
And if you want to get the binge eating toolbox, I'm going to put a discount code in the show notes as well. So you can get half off if you purchase it before the 14th of January.
Oh, you one-upped me. I'm going to have a discount code too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for podcast listeners.
Yeah. Does your discount code give half off?
No.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for sticking with us through 2022, and Happy New Year to you all.
Happy New Year.